everyone. In our previous video we have studied about the two types of pollination, that is the self-pollination and cross-pollination. Self-pollination is nothing else the transfer of the pollen grain from the anther of one flower to the stigma of the same flower, or the transfer of pollen grain from the anther of one flower to the stigma of another flower on the same plant. Now we have to see certain adaptation the flower undergoes in order to give way for the self-pollination. So there are different types of adaptations of a flower in order to undergo self-pollination. Let's see one by one. The first type of the self-pollination and adaptation is called as the homogamy. The homogamy is a condition where the male and the female reproductive organ of a flower matures at the same time. That is, if the egg matures at the same time, the anther matures to give rise to the pollen grain. The next type of adaptation is called as the Cleistogamy. In the Cleistogamy, the reproductive organs are enclosed in a flower. There need not have to be a condition that the flowers should always be closed. There is a condition where the flowers will be open. This condition of self-pollination called as Cleistogamy, where the reproductive organs of a flower is enclosed within a flower. And the example of this is oxalis, viola and commalina. Now you can see here in this diagram, this is an enclosed flower. Within the enclosed flower we have the male reproductive unit, that is the filament and the anther you can see, and the female reproductive unit of the flower you can see the ovary style and the stigma. Now these three plants, that is the flowers, that is the oxalis, viola and commalina, gives rise to two types of flowers. One is called as the Cleistogamous flower and Chasmogamous flower. The Cleistogamous flower are called as the closed flower, which is the adaptation of the self-pollination. In the Chasmogamous flower is the open flower, which is not the adaptation of self-pollination. Instead, it is the adaptation of cross-pollination. Another important thing of self-pollination is that the autogamous flower we have seen already, that is in case of the autogamy, the flower should always be bisexual, whereas in case of the getinogamy, the flower can be bisexual or monosexual. The third adaptation of self-pollination is called as Geocarpy. Geocarpy is a condition which gives rise to an underground fruit. Generally, the ovary gives rise to fruit in the aerial part, whereas in this condition, that is in Geocarpy, the fruit is being given underground. And the example is called as Arachis hypogea, which is the scientific name of groundnut. Since it is a scientific name, we have to underline the generic name as well as the species name. Okay. Coming for the groundnut, we have two compartments here to give rise to, these are the nuts, and it is being enclosed inside a single compartment. Okay. In case of Arachis hypogea, once the ovary is being fertilized aerially, what happens? Now this is the thalamus, this is the ovary, and this is the male reproductive unit, and this is the female reproductive unit. The ovary is attached to the thalamus with the help of the pedicel. Now, after fertilization, when the fertilization, that is the pollen grain attaches to the stigma, once it takes place, the pedicel elongates to the ground. Now, from the thalamus there is a pedicel. The pedicel is attached to ovary. The pedicel take a long way from the thalamus to the ground. When the tip of the pedicel reaches the ground, the ovary gives rise to fruit. This is a condition of Geocopy, which is an adaptation of self-pollination. The next adaptation is mainly based on the relationship between the anther and the stigma. The first adaptation for the self-pollination, let's see in case of the Mirabilis jalpa, that is the 4 o'clock flower. In case of Mirabilis jalpa, the anther, once it matures, it bends over the stigma to release the pollen grain. Suppose if this is the female reproductive unit of the flower and this is the stigma, once the anther matures to release the pollen grain, it bends over the stigma to release the pollen grain. So in case of Mirabilis jalpa, the anthers bends over the stigma to release the pollen grain. In case of Vinca rosea, that is in the second case, that is in Vinca rosea, which is called as Sada Pushpa or Nitya Pushpa. Here we have a funnel shaped flower and the anther, the filament is attached to the walls of the flower, and this is the case where the anther is attached, and generally the female reproductive unit is very short. Once the anther matures to release the pollen grain, the style elongates. When it moves up, it rubs the anther and the pollen grain sticks to the stigma. This is the case of Vinca rosea. The third case is the Solanum tuberosum, that is potato. In case of this, there is an anther. It is having an elongated anther. The stigma and style is also elongated. Usually the style will be elongated, whereas in this case the stigma will also be elongated. The stigma coils around the anther. So when the anther matures to release the pollen grain, it directly sticks to the stigma. So in this video we have seen the adaptation of self-pollination, that is the homogamy, Cleistogamy, Geocopy, and 3 different adaptations using the relationship of the anther and the stigma. That is in case of Mirabilis jalpa and Vinca rosea and Solanum tuberosum. Okay, in self-pollination we have a condition where the transfer takes place within the same flower or within the different flower on the same plant. Hence there is no genetic recombination and no variation in the organism, and it doesn't depend on any external agency. In the next video we will study about the adaptation for cross-pollination. Until then, happy learning from Edge to all.